Heaven sent.
So just a few weeks ago, we decided to go back in time to the golden years of Sony. And while we revisited what made the PlayStation 1, 2, and 3 so special for their time periods, it's only right that we do the same for the rest of its lineage. While the peak of Sony's presence is generally believed to be in its earlier generations, it's without a doubt that Sony were only just getting started. And while their bread and butter were found in the works of its at-home consoles, it wasn't long before they took their prowess into the realms of handheld gaming as well. But with such an incredible decade behind them, how did the overall appeal of a Sony product begin to evolve or possibly devolve over time? Well, that's what we're here to explore. So whether you're a first-time viewer or returning from our last installment, please join us on a visit to the past as we uncover the evolution of the PlayStation aesthetic. So grab yourself a snack and get ready to tuck in. We're going to be here for a good time and a long time. Now for all my fellow 90s babies gnawing, I'm sure you guys can recall just how big of an impact the Game Boy had on handheld gaming. I remember walking into my elementary gym class each morning, only to find a sea of children with their consoles in hand, all connected via link cables, swapping and battling their current Pokemon roster. And even for those not on the Pokemon trend, there were still plenty of enjoyable classics to play on the Game Boy. At-home consoles were just getting their bearings about a decade earlier, so with many players now demanding their experience on the go, there were a plethora of other ambitious ideas being thrown about at this time. But one of the more obscure offerings from this time period was the Sony Pocket Station. The Pocket Station was an almost Tamagotchi-like device, working as both a memory card and handheld console. This little bundle of joy allowed PlayStation enthusiasts to both save their game files and import mini-games from their PS1 collection. Now you're probably wondering why you've never heard of this thing, and it's most likely because it was Japanese exclusive. But even with it being one of the more overlooked offerings from its time period, it boasted some really interesting features. One of my favorite things about the Pocket Station is its look, because back at this time, clear cases on any piece of tech was the epitome of cool. So just looking at something such as this immediately takes me back. Now I don't know about you guys, but I love finding little quirky extras in my video games. You know, Easter eggs and what have you. So if you can relate to that, this thing is right up your alley. There were approximately 60 different Japanese titles that were compatible with the device, and simply put, there was quite the variety of secrets to uncover with it. For fans of the Yu-Gi-Oh series, the PS1 exclusive of Forbidden Memories will definitely spark your curiosity. First off, you could plug your Pocket Station device into the memory card slot, boot up the game, and select options, then dedicated software. From here you would install the game onto your device, and can now explore its 8-bit glory. Now much like the ability to trade Pokemon with the Game Boy link cable, two Pocket Stations running Forbidden Memory data could do much of the same, allowing players to trade and even create fusion cards with two separate devices. It also had a really cool feature in which you could line the infrared signal of the Pocket Station up to any other infrared device, such as a TV remote, which would then allow you to collect new cards that way as well. There were plenty of cards that could only be obtained using these exclusive features, which in my opinion was pretty damn cool. And there were plenty of cards that could only be obtained using these exclusive features, which in my opinion was pretty damn cool. But how about another game? You know, the Hideo Kojima masterpiece of Metal Gear Solid. Oh yeah, it had some Pocket Station features as well. On July 1st of 2021, Kojima-san himself had posted a tweet stating, "During MGS Integral, as the Pocket Station was released, I put some kind of fox dye in it, but I don't think anyone ever noticed." What he was describing was a feature in which each completed save would give you a fox dye file to save to your Pocket Station, which you could then send to other Pocket Station users. After clearing the game 5 times and sending said fox dye to 5 separate devices, it would unlock a special set of Gray Fox VR missions, which were later found in the VR mission's physical release of the game. Pretty cool, right? Safe to say, the Pocket Station was a pretty impressive little piece of tech, and it really fit into that strange, unexplored era of the early days of PlayStation. I just really miss when companies were willing to experiment with ideas and think outside the box for their consumers. But the Pocket Station was only the beginning of what Sony would be cooking up for the future of handheld gaming. So leaving off where we ended the last video, I think it's time for us to take a little trip down memory lane and revisit one of the most aesthetically pleasing consoles to ever exist. So get ready to dig out those UMDs and tuck in for an LCD love affair. It's time to dive into the PlayStation Portable. When looking back on the glorious time period of the early 2000s, I typically find myself reminiscing on the technology of its time. It was this wonderful sweet spot in which the tech was complementing our lives in newfound ways. You know, trading in that old Walkman for a pocket-sized MP3 player, or even taking our films on the road with an in-car DVD player. On-the-go entertainment was beginning to really make its mark on the industry at that time. So for a tech giant like Sony to drum up a new way for consumers to enjoy both games, music, and movies on the go, the common interest was soon piqued. The PlayStation Portable was first announced at E3 2003, where Sony CEO Ken Kutaragi had stated it was to be the Walkman of the 21st century. Now, the handheld gaming market had felt almost untouchable for nearly a decade at that point. With Nintendo's line of Game Boys swiftly destroying its competition, Sony knew they would have to come correct if they wanted to stand a chance in the race, meaning it was going to take a whole lot more than just gameplay to wow their consumers. And in the case of Sony's marketing, they were willing to get ahead by any means necessary. So before we dive into the aesthetic language of the console itself, how about we begin in review of some of the product's marketing, in order to gain a better understanding of it, you know what I'm saying? So without further ado, let's power on. Now, if you saw the part 1 of this video, then you already know just how far Sony will venture to market their products. So for Sony to construct hundreds of Titan-sized PSPs and plaster them all over major cities was just another day at the office. Here we have a nice little variety of this marketing practice in action. I'm really sad to say I'd never gotten to see one of these in person, but they certainly were grabbing the attention of anyone in their vicinity. Showcasing the multimedia properties of the device, as well as even showing some gameplay, these billboards were by far one of the most ambitious efforts I'd ever seen. But as with most Sony adverts, it only gets weirder from here. And here begins the madness. Oh Sony, will anything stand in the way of you getting your product into the minds of the public? Maybe even vandalism laws? Huh, of course not. Here we have some examples from their stealth marketing campaign, in which they hired multiple artists from a handful of major cities to plaster these funky-looking PSP enthusiasts onto neighborhood walls. While some residents of these places were pretty optimistic about the artwork, a lot of those who work for the cities weren't so keen on them, stating that Sony had ignored zoning laws and blatantly vandalized their neighborhoods. I mean, I've seen some ballsy tactics from this company throughout time, but this one was quite a shocker, even to me. But that's not to say that the controversy ended there. Here we have a cover from the good old gaming mag known as Edge. Here the PSP is stated as being the iPod killer. And if I had $1 for every time someone used the killer marketing speak in their assessment of a product, I'd probably be able to afford that sealed copy of Haunting Grounds I've been eyeing on eBay. Anyways, I was a big fan of those weird magazine adverts from back in the day, so when I saw this, I knew it would be right at home with this video. With the PSP being marketed for much more than its gaming capability, it's always nice to see that it had a pretty healthy roster of classic films on UMD. Plus, seeing Ryan Reynolds playing the main role of a horror film, man, the 2000s were such a weird time. Ah yes, the good old sex sells campaign, and I'm not sure which is more attractive, the scantily clad lady or the beautiful sight of Tekken Dark Resurrection. Either way, this advert was sure to win over the eyes of any unsuspecting viewer. And here we have the bread and butter of what made the PlayStation marketing so damn interesting back at this time. Much like the third place ads for the PS2, this advertisement has much of the same feel. That interesting yet slightly unsettling vibe that keeps you scanning the page for more detail. And as for the nature of this ad, it speaks for itself. I'll definitely be bringing my PSP to my next doctor visit. Phew, now this is one that should come with a viewer discretion warning. At first glance, I thought it was completely fan-made, but upon further research, I found that it was actually designed for a PSP advert in Mumbai, India. It's definitely an interesting, albeit gruesome approach to conveying an idea of respawning in game. And if any of these ads had gotten my attention, it was definitely this one. Wow. Here's one I had actually posted previously on the community tab, but I love it so much, I just had to bring it back. I'm not really sure if the PSP is supposed to resemble a pair of handcuffs or whatever may be the case, but I can definitely relate to the feeling of being imprisoned by some of the great games found on this little console. Another round of Dissidia? Anybody? Okay, something tells me this is definitely an ad. And not only does it remind me that I never got a PSP for Christmas, but also reminded me of how bootylicious this little console was from behind. I mean, meow. And for the final advert on our PSP journey, we have what may have been one of the most foolish marketing techniques I've ever seen. Apparently this was an ad campaign found in the Netherlands, but I would love to know who in the hell thought this was acceptable to publish. Not only did Sony get completely flamed for allowing this ad to be conceived, they also had little to no explanation for its meaning. Due to the much anticipated backlash, a Sony spokesperson was quoted saying, "All 100 or so images created for the campaign have been designed to show the contrasting colors of the PSPs and have no other message or purpose." And while that may have been true in their heads, it certainly didn't look good on their part. They just never know when to quit, these guys. So there you have it, another unhinged look into the world of Sony marketing, which may have very well been the peak of their insanity. But as far as the PlayStation Portable console itself, don't let its off-the-rails adverts deter you from enjoying one of the most beautiful spectacles in handheld gaming. So moving on to the actual gameplay and aesthetics of the console, let's take a look into what made this little device so incredibly special for the handheld space. So without further ado, let's begin our visual feast. As we had previously mentioned, the handheld space of gaming had been quite limited for some time in regards to hardware specs and visual capability. So for something as powerful as the PSP to come along in the year of 2004, it's safe to say that it was setting a whole new standard. Functioning as both a gaming, music, film, and even internet browsing device, this little black rectangle was the epitome of technological beauty. And while its launch price of $249 USD may have seemed a bit steep at that time, you'd be hard-pressed to find another handheld device with such capabilities. But we're not here to glaze the console for its vast array of features. Oh no. More so, we're here to talk about its visual stylings, and how its limited resources were able to create an aesthetic that's come to be appreciated over time. And before we dive into the console's performance and gameplay, let's start with its interface, and by that, I mean the home screen. I don't know about you guys, but I'll never forget my first time booting one of these bad boys up. Just seeing that massive LCD display coming to life was incredible. And after adjusting your time zones and all that typical startup jazz, you're then greeted by the home screen. And what looks very familiar to what you're probably used to on the PlayStation in present day, but you'd be surprised to find that this little guy was actually the pioneer of this sort of interface for all the future Sony consoles. With the PSP being marketed as a multimedia device, there were plenty of options to muck around with. You had the music, videos, photo gallery, web browser, customizable themes, the list really goes on. So I just remember getting my PSP and probably losing an hour or so just looking through all of this stuff before I even loaded my first game up. It was incredible to see something like this in a handheld. I mean, we didn't even really have proper smartphones yet at that time, so it just felt next level. And while I'm a major stan for all things PlayStation 2, I've always been a fan of the visual aesthetic that was found in the home screen interface, specifically the PSP and PS3. I always felt that the dynamic themes were super relaxing, almost like a hypnotic sort of lava lamp feel, you know? And it may be a little strange for me to say, like, the PSP home screen just felt very comforting, but before I get overly sentimental about moving wallpapers and ambient sounds, I think it's time that we fire up some games and see just how high-tech the PSP truly was. So for our first example, let's take a look at one of my personal favorite offerings on the console, that being Parasite Eve, the third birthday. Whenever I think about aesthetically pleasing visuals, I typically look in the direction of the good folks at Square. The Parasite Eve series is one that is steeped in gorgeous artwork. From the character designs, the pre-rendered backdrops, everything about this series has always been so damn atmospheric. So when they decided to take a step into a new direction with the third birthday, it yielded some pretty interesting results. Now I'm aware that this game can be quite a controversial take to many fans of the series, given the fact that it's a far cry from the series' original formula. But as far as beautifully rendered cutscenes and top-notch handheld graphics go, this game is among some of the best. It's not far-fetched to say that a lot of people found interest in the Parasite Eve series due to the presence of its main character Aya. I mean, you take a look at the first two games on PS1, and the cover art alone is enough to make me curious about who this mysterious woman is. So getting to see her fully rendered in robust detail for the third birthday is quite a treat for the eyes. Now I'm a sucker for games set in the wintertime, and the snowy landscapes of this one surely do not disappoint. The new over-the-shoulder perspective is a welcome feature to complement these visuals, and the cutscenes are beyond stunning. Combining all these visual feats into a pocket-sized experience is surely no small task, but for the impressive hardware of the PSP, this beautiful little console made light work of it. I mean, just take a look at this game.
すみません、私のミスで。あなたのそういうとこ好きよ。さようなら。カバリエル。
Now it may be a bit unfair for me to bring up a PSP title that was released so late in the console's life cycle. So how about we look back on one of its more beloved launch titles? You know, Lumines. Lumines is a slick little rhythm-based puzzle game that is just as much addicting as it is charming. And in the realm of aesthetics, it was right on time for a new era. Commonly known as the Frutiger aesthetic, bright colors and glossy interfaces became all the rage in the design of many tech products and interiors. So with everything beginning to have a theme akin to the latest Windows software, a hit puzzle title like Lumines was bringing this new style into the world of gaming. The beautiful 16:9 LCD display of the PSP was a wonderful vessel in delivering this game's appeal. I mean, it's almost kind of hypnotic in some ways to play. And pairing these visuals with its addicting gameplay and catchy soundtrack made it an instant handheld classic. But that wasn't the only classic that could be found on the console's launch day.
Ridge Racer!
Oh yeah, it's that time again.
Here we go.
I often like to say that the spirit of PlayStation just kinda died when they stopped making Ridge Racer games, and I still stand by that statement. But witnessing the sheer visual perfection that this game is on a handheld device is something that every gaming enthusiast should witness at least once. And those lovable arcade-style visuals have transferred over very well into the handheld space. This is a series that has always prided itself on being visually appealing, and I'd go as far as to say that this is one of the best looking games that ever came from the IP. Something about the patina-esque look of a PSP game just paired so well with this generation of graphics. And as much as I fight myself to describe these feelings in my videos, I feel like anyone that's also played these games can all relate. The overall concept of the PSP and its marketing was to be the future of handheld gaming. With such stunning visuals and a plethora of next level features, it certainly achieved that. Now I'm sad to say that this is where our journey through the history of PlayStation begins to take a bit of a downturn. Not in the sense of any product quality per se, but in a shift to the imagination. For a company that was once so devoted to instilling its presence into the mind of consumers, it's kinda strange to see how the overall feel of Sony began to lose its luster. Going back to our previous mention of the PSP, which emulated graphics much like that of the PS2, the PS Vita was Sony's next big venture into the world of handheld supremacy. Now this console basically improved upon every aspect of the PSP. You know, better graphics, frame rate, more features, you name it. And interestingly enough, the Vita was even Sony's introduction into the 8th gen of gaming. So with this little console looking to improve upon every facet of its predecessor, you'd be shocked to find that Sony was having a pretty hard time moving units. So, why was that? Well, let's go to the marketing, or lack thereof. So when covering the first half of the consoles in this series, the amount of marketing that I was able to uncover was honestly staggering. I mean, you had American, Japanese, India, Germany, ads from damn near every crevice of our world. And not only were they overloading the billboards and magazines, they were also hitting our TV screens as well. So with tons of really interesting and unique marketing coming from the first few consoles, you'd think they would have continued this trend with the Vita. Well, not so fast. The estimated budget for the Vita marketing was set at $50 million, which is only a third of the estimated budget for that of the PS2. Running with the slogan of "Never Stop Playing," they were leaning heavily into the trend of multiplayer on the go. With the Vita being equipped with 3G capability, now players could get their rocks off in a multiplayer setting anywhere that had a cell phone tower. And while that certainly was a pretty cool feature, it just felt as if people would prefer to do their online gaming in the comfort of their home. But other than that, there wasn't much else going on. Overall, it just felt as if the console itself was lacking in personality. Now there are plenty of other things to factor in with the Vita's mediocre rollout. I mean, the competition of smartphones for one, but this is a Sony product, gaming product nonetheless. How could it have possibly flopped? Whereas the PlayStation lineage felt so mystical and stylish, this just felt like a bland introduction to new tech. Now please, do not think for 1 second that I don't love the Vita, because it's absolutely my favorite handheld console, especially jailbroken. But I hadn't even given it a second thought until I purchased one just a couple of years ago, and I don't think that I'm alone in that. Maybe we were too busy snapbacking our tattoos or learning the Cat Daddy to give it a second look back in 2012, but I don't even remember anyone talking about it. Now a lot of people contribute its low sales due to the fact that the PS4 was right around the corner, and while that may be true, I've certainly got some things to say about that product as well. So let's fast forward to the wonderful year of 2013 and see just how the PlayStation aesthetic continued to fare into the 8th gen of consoles. But you might want to get in line. There were plenty of people waiting on this one. So far in this series, we've heavily focused on the overall visual appeal for each generation, and while that is what in my opinion made the first 3 consoles so special, the PS4 is a great example of the product being able to sell itself. At its time, it was the biggest console launch in history, selling over 1 million units on its first day in North America. Now that's no small feat by any means, especially without the presence of their usual marketing techniques. But as far as the heart and soul of the PS4 goes, did it even really have one? Kind of. Now I've owned every single console from the PlayStation lineage at this point, and although I had made tons of incredible memories playing games on my PS4, it almost felt as if the console was merely just a vessel. I'm sure some of you guys are shaking your heads like, bro, of course it's just a vessel, you use it to play games. And at that point, you're certainly correct. But plugging in a PS4 for the very first time just felt underwhelming. With the PS4 falling into the 8th generation, this was a time when online gaming was the primary focus, so the PlayStation Store and its plethora of advertisements are front and center as soon as you boot this thing up. The home screen is really just a reskinned version of the PS3, and while the ambient music is a nice touch, it just never really hit the spot for me. I'm very self-aware that I can be overly sentimental about certain things, especially when it comes to gaming. But the PS4 came into my life at a time in which I wasn't very nostalgic at all, and come to think of it, I'm not sure if it's a console I will ever be nostalgic for. Now how about a look at the console itself? It's got this very minimalistic sort of bland look to it. In my opinion, their least appealing console in the cosmetic department. The controller, however, has always been a favorite of mine, as it retains the classic shape of the DualShock with a new school twist. But when comparing it to the likes of the earlier consoles, it just sort of feels a bit soulless, you know? Now I'm sorry to all of you that have spent your golden years of gaming on this console, because in no way am I trying to discredit the epic experiences and friendships it may have formed for you. But we're here to analyze how the PlayStation aesthetic as a whole changed over time, and in my opinion, this is when Sony decided to take a more corporate approach to their products. No longer were the days of controversial advertising and imaginative marketing. It was just cut and dry, our product is pretty powerful and you should buy it, which really paled in comparison to that of the PS2 or even PS3 marketing just a decade earlier. Now this brings me to my next point, being its visuals. I would argue that this was the time in which we were beginning to see lifelike visuals on the console, especially in titles such as Resident Evil 7 or God of War. Before the 8th gen, games were essentially designed in ways that would make them look more sophisticated than they actually were. But looking back on, say, the PS4 Pro, it was able to deliver the same result in much higher fidelity and frame rate. But because of this shift in performance, we started to see a litany of classics being remade with new hardware. You had Shadow of the Colossus, Resident Evil 2, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and lest we forget, the GTA Definitive Edition. For the most part, they were all a refreshing take on beloved classics, but to say that I prefer them over the originals would be a bit of a stretch. Now, certain PlayStation 4 exclusives such as Bloodborne certainly held a very unique aesthetic, but can we really credit the PS4 for having that very same aesthetic feel that were found in games of the 6th or 7th gen? My personal belief is a hard no. And much of the same can be said for that of the current gen, with the PS5. So on that note, was Sony able to return to their imaginative roots on their latest console, or was it just a further descent into the corporate rabbit hole? Well, I'll let you, the viewer, be the judge of that. While I do appreciate gaming of every generation, it's no secret that we're always going to bias our interest on the things that we grew up on. But after being active here on YouTube and talking to so many of you guys throughout my time on this channel, it's really opened my eyes to how much things have changed in the world of gaming. So whether you want to call it nostalgia or maybe a conflict of interest, it just seems as though the general consensus missed the way that games used to be, and especially the PlayStation. I consider myself lucky to have been a part of what many consider to be the greatest years of gaming, but for you younger viewers out there, I'd love to know your opinions on this subject. Have Sony and their favorite line of consoles lost their luster after all this time, or is it just a matter of opinion as to whether or not gaming has changed for the worst? Either way, I appreciate you all joining me on this very long and winding journey through the aesthetic evolution of PlayStation. I had a great time making this video, and I hope you all enjoyed it as well. And please, comment down below your favorite memory with any of these consoles, as I'm always giddy to get to reminisce with you wonderful folks out there. But until next time, my name is Vincent, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Take care, stay safe, and stay gaming. Peace out, guys.